As we enter Unit 11, we are going to be getting introduced to integers. Integers is just kind of a fancy new word for any whole number, as long as it is not a fraction. We're also going to be learning about absolute value and how that relates to integers in Unit 11.1. So you should be taking some notes here. The absolute value of an integer, so again, any whole number, is the distance between the number and 0 on a number line. So it doesn't matter if it's negative or positive. Absolute value is simply just keeping in mind how far away is that number from 0. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's negative or positive, it's just how far is it away from 0. That's the most important thing to remember here. So the absolute value of a number, let's say this number was a, just a variable in this case, is written like this. So we've got these two bars, I guess, if you will, the absolute value symbol with the number in between them. That, when you see this symbol, that means they want you to be recording the value of that number as its absolute value. So if it was a negative, you would be thinking about it just once again in terms of how far is it away from 0. Okay, so if I've got my number line and I'm looking at two numbers, and I apologize for kind of the mess here. So I've got two numbers. I have the absolute value of -4, which I'm going to have defined, and then I have the number 4, and I need to find the absolute value of that. So these two numbers are very different. If you were just talking about value, one would have negative value, one would have positive value. But when you're talking about absolute value and you are only wanting to see how far apart they are from 0, you are going to find that they're equal to each other in terms of absolute value. So when we ask the question, how far away from 0 is -4, and we come up here, you can see, well, -4 is 1, 2, 3, 4 units away from 0. It's 4 units. It's not -4 units. It's just 4 positive units, 4 whole number units away from 0. And if you take +4 and plot it on the number line and work backwards towards 0, you can see that it is as well 4 units away from 0. So it's time to stop thinking about these as which has more worth, a +4 or a -4. You really need to be thinking about what are they asking you to determine. In this case, they want to determine the absolute value, which once again is just how far away is it from 0. And in that case, each of these are 4 units away from 0, so they are equivalent to each other. Here we're going to be finding the absolute value of 5. So you take your number line, you plot the number 5, and of course you're going to keep in mind where is that 0 on the number line. And we go backwards in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is 5 units away from 0, so the absolute value, remember again this symbol meaning absolute value, so the absolute value of 5 is 5 because it is 5 units away from 0. So finding the absolute value of -3, we're going to do that the exact same way. We're going to plot -3. We are going to count to the right towards 0. 1, 2, 3. We are 3 spaces away from 0, so the absolute value of -3 is 3, because we are 3 spots away. So let's work on comparing values in terms of which number is greater than, less than, or equal to. We've got we are going to find and compare the absolute value of -2 to -1. So first find the absolute value of -2. Okay, well, a -2 is here. It's 2 away from 0. So really, I'm comparing 2, because I'm comparing the absolute value of -2, which is 2, to a -1. Now, they're not asking for the absolute value of -1, so I am truly comparing a -1 to the absolute value of -2, which is 2. So I'm really comparing +2 to -1. And 2 is greater than -1. So you need to solve for the absolute value of the number first. Here they weren't asking for the absolute value. We were just taking the -1 at face value. and now we were rewriting the equation, we find that 2 is greater than -1. Here we've got the absolute value of 10 being compared to 11. Well, the absolute value of 10 is 10 because it is, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 away from 0, and 11, okay, 11 is 11 away from 0. So when we compare the absolute value of 10, which is 10, to 11, 11 is going to be farther away from 0 than 10, and so therefore it has a greater value than 10. All right, so here we've got a substance, and we have their equivalent or their freezing points. And so a freezing point is the point at which a substance freezes. Okay, so when compared to 0. So butter's freezing point, this is the temperature of water in which water freezes. So butter will freeze at 35. So I'm just going to put 35, and we'll just label it B for butter. Airplane fuel will freeze at a temperature of -53 below the freezing point of water, which again is 0. So we'll put -53, and we'll call that AF for airplane fuel. Honey freezes at -3, H for honey. Mercury is at -39, M for mercury, and candle wax will freeze at a temperature of 55 degrees. And CW for candle wax. So we are going to be using this graph, which of course, putting things on a nice line plot like this makes it really easy to see which have freezing points closer to the freezing temperature of water and which ones are furthest away. So taking data and putting it into a graph might be a great strategy for you if you visually want to see which are further away from 0 or closer to 0. We're going to use this graph to answer some questions. Again, the freezing point is the temperature at which a liquid becomes a solid. Which substance has the lowest freezing point? So the lowest freezing point is going to be the one that we would say is the furthest away from 0 in terms of being a negative, right? And so if this is the freezing point, they're only getting lower as we go to the left of this on this graph. They're not asking for absolute value. This has nothing to do with absolute value at this point. They just want to know which one has the lowest freezing point. In other words, which one will freeze at the absolute coldest temperature on this graph. 55 degrees Fahrenheit is not very cold, so it's certainly not going to be candle wax. That's well above freezing. But as we go to the left and get into these negatives, we are going to see that airplane fuel has the lowest freezing point temperature at a -53. So we'll put airplane fuel at -53. All right, so now we can compare. Is the freezing point of airplane fuel or candle wax closer to the freezing point of water? So again, let's put on here airplane fuel is -53, and candle wax is 55. Okay. So keep in mind, in this one, I'm comparing which one is closer to the freezing point. Well, again, the freezing point is 0. So in this one, I am going to be looking at absolute value. I'm not comparing which one freezes at a colder temperature or a warmer temperature. I am looking to see which one is closer to the freezing point of water, which is 0. So I am going to use absolute value because it has nothing to do with cold or warm. It has everything to do with just how far away is it from 0. So my absolute value of airplane fuel is 53. My absolute value of candle wax is 55. So if candle wax is here and airplane fuel was here at 53, I would say, since airplane fuel is closer to 0 than candle wax, and candle wax is to the right still, so 53 is closer to 0. I would say that the freezing point of airplane fuel or candle wax, airplane fuel is going to be the closest to the freezing point of water.